for me, the first time I saw this movie, it bothered me
Oh, yeah.
because
Oh,
it it
same.
it sat with me because what is one of the scariest things you could think about that to not be able to get help from is somebody following you.
Yeah,
No one wants to be followed. I don't care who you are. Nobody
yeah.
wants to be followed. And then to make it worse, no one can see the thing following you but you. Hello, friends. I'm Anderson Marchak,
And I'm Ricardo Segura.
and we are the Panel Bros. Welcome to the panel.
Welcome to the panel.
All right, here we are.
Yeah.
As of this recording, it is the middle of October 2023. We are in spooky season.
Yes, I love spooky
So
season.
we're continuing with our theme of horror movies here. So let's go.
Yeah.
This next one here was directed by David Robert Mitchell. It was released March the 13th of 2015. It is a movie we've been speaking about for some time now of when we will actually get to do a breakdown, but the day has come.
Yep.
Today is the Panel Bros official breakdown of It Follows.
Man.
Mm,
Perfect title because when I think we both experienced this, but for myself, when I was done watching this movie, it followed me. You know what I mean? Like
right.
this is one of those movies that stuck with me. And when it comes to the horror genre, that's always fun. It's always exciting to know that a movie stuck with you like that. This movie had me checking the backseat of my car. It had me walking sideways in my own place. I just felt this uneasy feeling of either being watched, just looking at people in the distance. This movie had a good hold. This movie had a good hold of me, man. And you know, nowadays that doesn't happen too often. We're so engaged with the technical aspect of filmmaking and being blown away by performances and actors. Sometimes we can get swept up in all that, and sometimes it's hard for a movie to actually shake us a little bit. But this one definitely got me.
I like bringing up It Follows to horror fans because it's kind of like a hidden gem.
Hmm.
So when I bring it up, I get like praise from, the horror movie fan because actually knew about it.
Yeah.
So obviously, we're also doing this to bring some more eyes on it as well as we
Yeah.
will continue with movies on the podcast here. But let's get started.
Oh yeah.
Alrighty, so here we are with the opening scene.
Oh.
We have Annie Marshall. She runs out of a house, um, seemingly being pursued, but denying that she needs help to onlookers.
Hmm.
People are asking, "Are you okay, Annie?" "Yeah, I'm fine."
Yeah.
She runs back into her house, then runs out with car keys and drives away. That night, Annie Marshall sits alone on a beach, frightened, and tells her parents over the phone she loves them. In the morning, her mutilated corpse remains on the beach. She's on her back, and one leg is bent completely backward. So, this is quite the opening scene here. The tension of
Yeah.
Annie running is magnified by the music, and we don't see what is following her. All
Nope.
we know is that she is being followed. Um, it's disturbing and scary from the jump.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't see. It's just the feeling of uncertainty and not knowing what she was running from. And again, people are asking, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "I'm fine," but she's not. You're kind of like, "Well, why isn't she asking for help? Why?" And we'll find out why as the movie progresses. But her just running and then going to the beach, and my first instinct, even the first time I watched it, even know not really knowing the rules of the film at this point, I remember with her sitting on the beach and noticing she had the car lights on her, but her back was to the ocean. And it was like, oh, nothing can sneak up on her from behind. She's got herself in a position where she's like, if anything's coming towards her, it's going to be from the front. She's going to be able to spot it. And then the very next cut, as you mentioned, is just her corpse, and her leg is completely backwards. I think you even see like a piece of her shin bone or her thigh bone sticking out, and it's just a horrible image. And you're just like, oh, and like that's your opening, like that's your cold open, and you're like, oh my god, I don't know what just happened, but it is easily a favorite of mine.
So we have university student Jay Height. She goes on a date with her new boyfriend, Hugh.
Mhm.
At the movie theater, Hugh points out a girl in a yellow dress. They're playing a game.
Yeah.
And when Jay says she cannot see the girl, Hugh becomes unnerved and asks that they leave. So now we're seeing someone there that isn't there, and it's happened again. Well,
Mhm.
we see them. We finally see them, actually, but only us and Hugh can see. So
Yeah.
now we're getting a little bit more of the plot here. We have another date where Hugh and Jay sleep together for the first time in his car, but afterwards, he incapacitates Jay with chloroform.
Mhm.
She wakes up tied to a wheelchair, where Hugh explains that he has passed something on to her through intercourse. She will be pursued by a single entity that only they can see, but which can take the appearance of any person. It
Yeah.
only moves at a walking pace, but it will always know where she is and will be approaching at all times. If it catches Jay, it will kill her and pursue the previous person to have passed it on, Hugh. So now Hugh waits, and then a naked woman slowly approaches them to prove that Jay is being followed. Then it urges Jay to sleep with another person soon. He drives Jay home and he flees. So let's unpack this here. We get a
Yeah.
premise. We get the premise of the movie here, and what a way to show us.
Oh, yeah.
You're right there with Jay thinking he was unwell. There's no way this is real, until you see the entity. And there is a great shot showing Jay from the front of the wheelchair as the wheelchair swinging around, the camera's
Mhm.
swinging with her. So she's helpless, but we're right there with her. And then we see the entity for the first time, um, in the form of the woman not wearing any clothes. The woman keeps walking forward slowly. It is
Yep.
so unsettling, and you feel relieved when Hugh pushes her away, with the wheelchair and drives, because he's like, you see it, right? And then he starts running,
Yep.
but then you just see the woman just
Yeah.
walking slowly.
It's
And so when they speed off, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm glad they got away. But to me, this is just really unnerving once they reveal this.
Yeah, it's really unsettling, let alone that the entity you're not expecting, you don't know what to expect really. And you see a naked woman and it's just it's very uneasy. They're in an abandoned warehouse. So the idea that there's just a random naked woman walking by in itself is very like eerie. And then you realize why it's the entity just taking the form of this woman. And the music plays a great role. It's just got this great tension filled and horror filled vibes. And it's so scary because she's tied to the chair, so you just feel like, oh my god, like let her out of the chair, let her out of the chair. And he's like, he's making sure that she is well aware of what this is. And he's like, you see it, right? Because as you mentioned, when they went on the previous day and they go to the movies, she doesn't see what he sees. And as an audience member, I'm like, well, what is he talking about? And he's like, girl, you don't see her. And she's like, I don't see it. So you're like, oh, so in this very moment where she sees what he sees, they're both terrified. And I was so worried the first time I saw this because I thought maybe I was like, is he gonna leave? Like, but no, he takes her and he runs because then he explains that it's kind of like one of those chain letters where like after if it takes you out, it will then go down the chain again and come after me. So telling her the rules and everything else, and you're kind of like, this is heavy. Like this is a lot to drop on a person. Like right now, like it all sounds absolutely crazy, like you said. But she's seeing it, and there's just something so unnerving about an entity, and it being a naked woman that has no emotion,
Right.
it's not speaking, it's not running, it's just a very, very like methodical walk, and it's just unnerving. And they hightail it out of there. And like you said, even though they're in a car and getting away, you're still like, but that thing's still back there walking. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like, and like he mentioned, it's never gonna stop.
So the next day, the police cannot find the naked woman or Hugh, who we find out was living under a false identity. At school, Jay sees an old woman walking toward her, invisible to others, and she flees. So now she's
Hmm.
seen the entity change shape.
Yep.
Um, Once again, the music builds the tension, and we see it for the first of many times, the entity in the background as Jay continues being pursued,
Yes.
because the entity won't stop, but we see Jay, running towards
Yeah.
us.
And I did wanna say one of the great things about that reveal is that they're at school.
Right.
So, there's so much great camera work in this movie that they do a lot of wide shots, and the camera will constantly move in a slow panning motion, and we now know the rules, so we're kinda, like, scanning the room for anything that's a little out of place. So, you're at a school, a campus, and you're seeing students, and you're kinda like, is that?" But everyone looks traditionally normal, and then you just see this old woman in a nightgown looking directly at her from across the campus, and you're like, nope, that's it right there. And like,
Right.
she tries to talk, she's like, hello, and other people are going, are you talking to us? Because you realize nobody can see it. And man, it's just an old woman, that's all it is, but it's just so uncomfortable.
So Jay's sister Kelly and her longtime friends Paul and Yara spend the night at Jay and Kelly's house to support Jay because of this traumatic thing she's gone through. Someone smashes a window and Paul investigates, but he doesn't see anyone. Jay then goes downstairs, and in the house, we see a disheveled, urinating, half naked woman walking toward her, and she runs upstairs to the others who cannot see the entity. So she runs away from the entity. She screams or runs away. The entity continues to be disturbing, whatever forms the entity takes.
Mhm.
Then a tall man enters the bedroom. Jay flees the house by bike. So Yara is standing there. Yara's knocking on the door, and
Uh-huh.
she's like, "Don't let it in. Don't let it in." It's like, "It's me. It's Yara. It's me." The tall man, when they open the door out of nowhere, the tall man comes up behind her. So I'm going to give a shout out to the tall man here. So the
Mhm.
tall man is seen as one of the biggest jump scares in the movie, if not the
Yeah.
biggest jump scare, because you don't see it coming. This is not CGI. This is
No.
not practical effects. This man is actually this big. I had to look it up. The actor really looks like that. So shout out to Mike Lanier. He's
Mhm.
7'7", and
Whew.
unfortunately, he passed away in 2018 at the age of 48. But it was just so unnerving to see the
It
entity take
was.
that form, and you just you didn't expect to see something like that, you know?
No, the way because right before that, as you mentioned, we see a half naked woman. So when she runs upstairs and she closes the door behind her, you start hearing voices, and I'm like, no, don't trust the voices. Like in my brain, I'm like, don't trust the voices. It's the entity, but it's her friends, and I'm like, oh, okay, it is her friends. Okay, all right, we're good. And then you start hearing the knocks, and then you hear the voice again, and you're like, don't. And they open the door, and and her friend standing right there, and you're like, okay. But the way that it's framed, you have there's a doorway, and it's just darkness. It's just darkness, and you see this tall man. He has to kind of bend his neck a little bit so he can fit under. That's how tall this guy is. And it's so scary because again, you hear nothing but almost like a giant footstep, like boom, and it just comes in. And I remember if I could have jumped out of my seat, I would have because it is very scary seeing that big guy walk through like that. And she hightails it. Jay is
Yeah.
not playing.
I
Jay
think
is
he
gone.
might have had a little makeup on his face, maybe,
Mhm.
maybe a little makeup. I mean, if there was any CGI, it might have been to his eyes to make them look white,
Yeah.
if that,
Yeah.
but he's really that big,
He's a tall
So,
dude, man. And again, like you said, what works so well for it is we weren't expecting it at all. Like
right.
we just weren't expecting that.
So, with the help of their neighbor Greg, the group discovers Hugh's real name, Jeff Redmond, at the
Mhm.
school. And they go to the school. They did a little investigation to find this information out. It isn't pointed out, but if you look carefully during that scene at the school, you can see the entity coming toward the camera in the form of a female student. And it's in the background the whole time, but they don't
Mhm.
see. But
They
then
never see
once
it.
you see them reversing the car, you see the entity again, and you know it's
Yep.
the entity because of that slow walk. And she gets a little closer before the car drives away, and nobody noticed.
Nobody notices it.
So
Nobody notices
nice,
it. And
nice
again,
little touch if the audience
it's
sees it.
it's so good for us as a viewer because again, the movie does a really good job of building tension. And even though the character doesn't see it, we're uneasy and we're like, no, 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 that's the entity. Someone pay attention. And they get out. They don't even realize how close they were. And that's what made that scene so great.
So they find Jeff's home, formerly Hugh, and Jeff explains that the entity began pursuing him after a one night stand. And he reiterates that the only option is to sleep with someone else and implore them to do the same. He recommends that Jay drive to a distant location to buy herself time to think.
Mhm.
So Greg drives Jay, Kelly, Yara, and Paul to his family's lake house. The next day on the lakefront, while Greg leaves to go pee, the entity arrives in the form of Yara and attacks Jay from behind by grabbing her hair, which is witnessed by her friends. So
Yeah.
now we're getting into it here. You see the hair being pulled by something invisible. The hair just,
Mhm.
just gets yanked up. And it's odd. Well, we'll get to that in a second here, but Paul hits it with a chair. He gets thrown. It's unsettling again for a different reason now, because Yara is a part of the group. She's in the water,
Yep.
but the entity chose Yara's form,
Mhm.
almost to like play a mind game. And the entity starts changing forms more often after this and within the same chase. There was
Yeah.
like the little boy in the shed, and then it changed back into a woman. So now
Yeah.
we're seeing the entity change shape, but now we're seeing, before there was like no rhyme or reason, but now it's like, well, now you're picking people we know what's going on here.
Yeah,
So,
because, the former Hugh had mentioned in the beginning of the movie, he goes, "It's not dumb. Like, it's not dumb, like, this thing is smart." And using the friend, Yara was good because if Jay just didn't happen to be looking, like, it snuck up on Jay completely. She had her back to it, she had no idea. But if she had seen it, she might have hesitated, like, "Wait a minute, like, Yara?" Like, and that would have been just enough to get her. But it's a really cool scene because again, no one else can see the entity. And I'm sure that there were still doubts within the group. We even hear some. But in that moment when her hair stood up,
yeah,
they all knew something was wrong. And then one hits it with a chair, and you don't see anything, but you can see something make contact, and he gets thrown away. And you're like, okay, no, there absolutely is something there. So they're starting to come through even more and more. Jay's got a revolver. She's got a weapon. She shoots it right in the neck, and it falls to the ground. And that was the first time I was like, wait a minute, can we hurt it? Like I was like, can we? Is this something that we can do? But then she just gets right back up like nothing. The door gets smashed, and then there's just quiet and I don't know why Jay, for whatever reason, decided to walk towards the door, but her friend went missing. She's calling his name, and now we have somewhat of a little boy. A little boy sneaks his head in and kind of like growls. And again, Jay, like a track runner, gone.
right. So Jay flees in Greg's car, and you see everyone chasing after her, and then you see the entity walking behind
Mm-hmm.
everybody as she's racing off because they can't see the entity.
Yep.
She crashes the car and wakes up in a hospital with a broken arm. To buy herself time, Jay unfortunately decides to sleep with Greg in the hospital because this is the
Yeah.
only way. Greg denies the existence of the entity because now she said, "Hey, we did something. Now you're going to start seeing it." You
Mm-hmm.
know, he says, "I don't see it," despite the insistence of Jay's friends. Later, Jay sees the entity in the form of Greg walking towards Greg's house.
Bro.
And she knew it wasn't Greg because of the way because of the way the person was walking. She knew it was the entity.
Mm-hmm.
It smashes a window and enters. Jay runs into the house and finds the entity in the form of Greg's half naked mother attacking and killing Jay. The entity's knocking on the door, and then, "Mom, what do you want?" Too late. Open the door to the entity. Entity got him. So
It's
now
a
we know.
very uncomfortable scene
Yeah, it's awful.
because there's a lot of we understand how the entity is passed on from person to person is through sexual intercourse, and there's a lot of sexual innuendos that are undertones for the movie, and we'll speak about that later. But seeing everything that happens with the mom, with the image of the mother, I could only imagine like it's again, we don't know the character, we don't know the mother, but when he says, "Mom, what do you want?" we're like, "Oh no." And then you see what happens, and it's just very disturbing, the scene as it plays out. And knowing that it took the image of his mother in order to do those things was horrific.
Right. So now to me, this was confirmation that the entity is actively playing mind games with you. We see the entity enter the house as Greg,
Hmm.
and then the entity changes into his mom just to get him.
Hmm.
So we know the entity knows what it's doing at this point. Jay flees by car and spends the night outdoors. On a beach, Jay sees three young men on a boat. She partially undresses and walks into the water. We don't see it, but it's hinted that she probably tries to pass on the entity to one, one of the men, if not all of them. We don't know. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
this is
It's just hinted at, we
yes.
don't know.
We don't and I was gonna ask, I was gonna say because I've I was reading to see how people thought, and there's some people that believe that she did, and other people that believe that she didn't, that maybe she
She just went for a
got
swim.
yeah,
Right,
that she thought about it, and that she second guessed it because she realizes that by doing this, she could be potentially, sentencing people to death.
right,
She just witnessed something happen. So there's a moment of vulnerability here where it's like, did she do it? And it's up to the viewer because we
right,
never
right.
hear anything about
Well,
those people ever again.
the reason why people try to pass it on is because the entity can only follow one person at a time.
One person, exactly.
So if if there's multiple people being followed, that's one less person follow. That's one you're following me. You're not following me.
Yeah.
You're following somebody else potentially. So
Yep.
it's never confirmed. I would like to think that Jay wouldn't do this because
Me too. Me too.
I think she just thought about it
Yes.
and,
That's my opinion.
it's like, "I'm just gonna take a swim," and then, the guys probably said something stupid, and she's like, "I'm just swimming, leave me alone,
That
whatever, whatever."
that's my feeling as well. I want to believe that she
Right,
thought about it and realized if she does that, these
right,
men could die. Like, and
right,
she doesn't want to be
right, because
responsible for
because
that.
she already did it to Greg, her neighbor that
Yeah.
she's known for years,
Yeah.
and she must feel awful, so now why would
Yes.
obviously, these are strangers, but you just saw it kill somebody, why would you do that
Yes.
again, you know?
Yeah.
So, we're back home now. Jay's reunited with, Paul. Paul says he's willing to take the risk, so he
Mhm.
asks Jay, "Listen, if we do this, it'll be one extra person for the entity to follow." And he asks Jay to pass it on to him, but she refuses.
Mhm.
The group plans a last-ditch effort to kill the entity by luring it into a swimming pool and dropping electrical devices into the water. So Jay waits in the water until the entity arrives with the appearance of her father.
Yeah.
Instead of entering the pool, it throws the devices at her. So, firing at an invisible target, Paul accidentally wounds Yara, but shoots the entity twice before it falls in the pool. It was really cool the way they did this. They managed to throw a sheet over the entity, so
Yes,
now
this
they
was
could
really
see where
cool.
the entity was. Shades of the Invisible Man, you
Yes,
know,
very much.
and which was a great idea here. Then once that happened, you know, Paul didn't hesitate. He knew where the head was, and he was able
Boom,
to
headshot.
shoot the gun. As it pulls Jay underwater, Paul shoots it again. He keeps shooting in the water, and eventually it hits it.
Mhm.
And Jay escapes as it sinks to the bottom. When Paul asks if it is dead, Jay approaches the pool and silently watches as the pool fills with blood. It's a great visual.
It's a lot of blood, man.
Yeah,
Like, it
you
just
just
it
see
just
it
it just fills up the pool with blood.
right. So we're back at Jay's house, and Jay and Paul they sleep together. Um, Paul drives through town. And by the way, let's back up here. It's been revealed slowly throughout the movie that Paul's had a crush on Jay for years.
Yes.
So when
Yes.
he pretty much noticed that her and Greg did something, well, first of all, he's been watching from the back, and then her and Hugh slash Jeff.
Mhm.
We don't know how many years he's been looking, having feelings for her and having her watch go through boyfriend after boyfriend after boyfriend, and then
Yep.
now it's like Greg, who he knows she doesn't care about, she only
Yeah.
did it just to pass the entity. It's like, he didn't say it, but I actually care about you. So why
Yeah.
don't you do this so we can fight this thing together? And she
Yeah.
turns him down. But now that everything's over with, she chooses Paul.
Yeah.
Um, so they do sleep together. Paul drives through town, and he passes random prostitutes, you
Yep.
know. Yara recovers at the hospital from the gunshot wound, which was accidental. And later on, you see Jay and Paul walk down the street holding hands as you see a figure slowly walking behind them. And that's our movie.
And that's the credits.
Phew.
It's I love the ending too because the ending is up for interpretation. It's ambiguous. If you it could be the entity, it could not. It could just be a person, but the
Right.
way it's framed, again, it's supposed to make you feel that way. It's supposed to
Right.
make you feel like did they defeat it? Because look, again, when Paul asked like did we kill it?
Right.
That's the first time we've seen something like that. It was so much blood and like the optimistic side of you was like, did they? did they kill it? And then they slept together to be safe, and then he drives by the prostitutes, which I didn't even think about that. That's a, it's an unfortunate decision to make, but it's like, oh, well, he'll sleep with a prostitute. That prostitute will then sleep with someone else, and that person will continue. And if it ever gets back to the prostitute, by that point, she will probably be sleeping with someone else, and it'll constantly stay in this limbo right here. That's what he's hoping for, at least. But God only knows if it actually worked, because at the end you see them holding hands and they're going to ride through it together, and it's just that uncertainty, man, and that uncertainty gets you.
Right. So let's give our initial thoughts upon this rewatch here. For me, the first thing I notice is, me, I love a good short movie, something that gets right to the point. If it's intentional, and the runtime for It Follows is 100 minutes, it's an hour and 40 minutes. But that ideally, a short movie is supposed to be able to get straight to the point.
Yes.
It's not just filled with all this action or whatever you're looking for crammed into a small movie, but it's a small scale story. And for me, I wouldn't call it an easy watch, but
Mhm.
it gets straight to the point. And
Yes.
that's one thing I enjoy about this. And there's just so much mystery. We don't know where this thing came from, what,
Nope.
what, why it's doing this. It was just so mysterious. And um, the director, David Robert Mitchell, he just uses that trope of less is more to make
Mhm.
It Follows work. And a lot of tricky camera angles of, I guess it's on the swivel here that,
Mhm.
so we can just go back and forth. A lot of panning, because when it
Yes.
pans this way, and then you pan this way, and then it pans back, and then you see the entity coming, and I mentioned to you earlier, a lot of times you see the entity in the background while the
Yeah.
characters in the foreground, and you're just looking at them and you're like, get away. It's going to get
Yeah,
you.
and it's specifically laid out in the way that you can see our characters, but that entity is always in the background, so you can see it. It's really, really cool stuff that way.
Yeah. And also, I guess, well, let's just touch on it now. Like, for me, the first time I saw this movie, it bothered me
Oh, yeah.
because
Oh,
it it
same.
it sat with me because what is one of the scariest things you could think about to not be able to get help from is somebody following you.
Yeah,
No one wants to be followed. I don't care who you are. Nobody
yeah.
wants to be followed. And then to make it worse, no one can see the thing following you but you,
But
you
you,
know?
and that's horrifying.
So, I was checking my back seat. Well, no, I
Yeah,
wasn't checking my back seat.
I
I was
was.
I was looking in my rearview mirror to see if there was somebody following me in my rearview mirror
Yeah, dude,
when I
like
was driving. So, but the cool thing is that, there was a gimmick and the gimmick worked. And,
yes.
for me, even though it's a small scale movie, um, for me, that's why It Follows works.
Yeah, the movie, it does a good job. Again, we talk about this, less is more, right? Less is more. And sometimes you can tell us the rules and that's all you need. We don't sometimes it could be just as fun not knowing all those things, right? Because we start to play with one another, go, hey, what do you think the entity is? Where do you think it came from? Where do you think it started? How long do you think it's been going for? So it's fun that we are introduced through Hugh's character, where he's just like, hey, these are the rules. This is what you have to do, off to the races, and that's it. And you go, okay, that's it. We're good. You go, like you say, we got a nice hour 40-minute movie. It's a nice short movie. It's right to the point. So it's like, hey, we know the rules. Let's try to outsmart it, and that's it. And that works. Less is more approach, especially with horror. I love the less is more approach because it allows us to feed off the energy of the film itself, and then kind of build off our own head canon, if you will, and see what happens. But I appreciated the idea that this thing could look like anybody. That to me is horrifying, that it can be anybody. And look, there's a couple different messages that are in this movie, right? The idea that the threat can be anybody, the threat can look like anybody, the threat can be your loved ones. I love that aspect in that part of the story, because in reality, that can often be the case. Sometimes something could be, horribly done by someone, someone you care about, someone you love. She sees her dead father, she sees her friend, and then God knows how many other people have seen what form of this entity, and that is scary in itself. And the idea that it will never stop, I think that also plays a huge role, is knowing that whatever is coming after you will never stop.
Right.
That in itself is probably the scariest thing about the movie, is that you can never get away. all you can do is hopefully pass it on long enough that it will continue down and hopefully everybody listens. But if it starts backtracking, you're back in the line of sight and you've got to continue moving forward. But there's a lot of things, again, there's a lot of things about sex. There's a lot of, talk about, this being comparable to, like, in real life, like STDs. Who you sleep with follows you, uh, uh what was his name? You have Paul and Greg. Those two characters are how they treat Jay and how they look at Jay, because there's a very specific part in the movie where after Greg and Jay sleep together, Greg is still like, I don't think it's what she says it is, but he still slept with her. So he still used her fear that she was like, no, I need to do this. And he still slept with her, even though he didn't really believe in it. Meanwhile, you have Paul, who genuinely cares about her,
Right.
who wants to sleep with her, not just because, look, there's feelings there for sure, but he wants to do it to help her. Like,
Right.
he's like, no, give it to me, and let's do this together. Like, there's a different dynamic between how
Right.
these two men are looking at sex with this one woman. There's a lot of that going throughout the film, and even Hugh says at one point when he's talking to the group, he's like, hey, just have sex with somebody else. It should be easy for you. You're a woman. You're a girl.
Right.
Anybody. And like, there's a lot of that in this movie. So like, there's horror of the supernatural nature, but then there's also the real horror in nature and how like scary sex can be, and sex with different people and how they perceive sex and whatnot. So there's a lot to take away from this movie that I appreciate it.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack there as far as, sex and society's feelings about sex and stuff like that
Hmm.
too, because it took like there's an old trope of, don't have sex, otherwise the killer will kill you, you
Yeah.
know, and it's almost just like, well, why is the entity targeting people for doing
Hmm.
this? Like, is this like a demon? Is this like
Yeah.
a curse that somebody brought forward one day? We don't know. That's what
No,
makes it
we
even
know
scarier,
nothing.
and what makes it even scarier is that we thought that they killed it,
Hmm.
and it maybe it came back, maybe not, but if this thing can't
Yeah.
be stopped, then, so what's the true way to stop it? Just let it just continue getting back at everybody down the line,
Yeah.
you
Like,
know? Because my guess is, if you sleep with enough people, that will distract it enough that you can get away from the entity,
hmm
and it's, what's that little that it reminds me of that thing online where they say you have a slug or a snail coming after you your entire life,
Oh, yeah, yes,
but once it touches you, you die. Would you take,
yes,
the million or, whatever, $1 billion?
yeah, yeah.
And people are like, "Oh, I'll just fly to the other side of the planet," and
I
then
was like,
the
but
snail
it'll
will
never
never get me.
stop. It'll
Yeah, but
never
it
stop.
will never stop,
Yeah.
So it reminded me of that. Um, Obviously, I saw the movie before that scenario came out
Yes. Yeah.
online, but, I think about It Follows now, when I see that
Yeah.
scenario, but and the fact is the entity does just walks. The entity is
That's it.
just walking, but it will get you. It will
It
get
will
you
get you.
eventually.
And like you, I'm curious, like, has anyone tried to kill this before?
Right,
Because Hugh says it. He goes, "You can't stop it." So I'm like, wait, has he tried to kill it? Has he heard of others trying to kill it? What happens when the line ends? What if it kills everybody? Like, does it just disappear?
right.
Does it find a new pattern? Like, there's so many questions, but that's what makes it fun because it opens up a discussion. It's one of those movies, and I'm glad it didn't have a sequel, but they could have absolutely done one if they wanted to, because there's a lot to explore still. And that's fun. It's fun that there's a lot to explore. And I'm perfectly fine with them not doing another one, because when this one came out, like you said, it was kind of like a hidden gem. I remember people talking about it and being like, hey, you have to watch It Follows. I'm like, what is that? And they would tell me like, oh, it's great. It's got this very like 70s vibe with the music and even the aesthetic of the film, which is very interesting because a lot of the movie looks like the 70s, but it's not. Like, the director did something that I've always found interesting, where it's like you kind of create whatever aesthetic you want for the film, whatever time period, because they have box TVs, but then the girl has like a smartphone that looks like a seashell, and everyone's wearing like the darker colors and whatnot from the 70s. So it's a very interesting aesthetic. But there's a lot about this movie that they left open for discussion, for debate, and for exploration. And I'm okay that we didn't get to see it, because we just get to discuss those things. But I love the tones. I love the talk of sex. I love the talk of being, it will always follow you, and the competitive nature between individuals and whatnot. So again, this is one of those hidden gems that I hope more people watch. I'm trying my best. I'm trying to tell people about it. And like, hey, please watch It Follows. It's a great horror film. Like you, there are other people who I did know that watched it that were terrified. And that's one thing that I love so far, is that everyone that I've talked to about this movie that has seen it has all said the same thing, that it's stuck with them. So it lets me know that the movie did something right.
So let's take a look at the box office here. It Follows had a budget of 1.3 million and it had a box office of 23.3 million. So it was a success,
Nice.
not
Yeah.
not a blockbuster by any means, but it was a box office success. And let's give some love to the cast here. We have
Yeah.
Micah Monroe as Jay.
Mhm.
We have Keir Gilchrist as Paul, Olivia Lucardi as Yara, Lily Seppi as Kelly. We have Daniel Zavato as Greg, Jake Weary as Hugh slash Jeff, Bailey Spry as Annie Marshall, the woman from the opening. We have, and I'll stop it there. But everyone did a good job, mostly
Yeah.
unknowns. Shout out to Micah Monroe. She was really awesome. The lead as Jay. She went on to as almost like a scream queen, continuing to
Yeah.
do horror movies and thrillers. So, but this was the one where they got the eyes on her, and she has to sell this concept in this movie. But you know, uh, small cast, small unknown cast, but it
Mhm.
still worked. Um, and that's another reason why I enjoyed this movie.
Yeah, I'm always going to appreciate a smaller cast and an unknown cast.
Right.
I love seeing unknown actors put into a film that hopefully we get a lot of eyes on it, especially the horror. Because one thing that uh, I want to feel when I'm watching a movie, especially in the horror genre, is that anybody can go. I always appreciate that aspect of film. That's why it's always fun when you can have a big name who bites the dust in a horror movie, because you don't expect it. But I always really, really appreciate when unknown actors get to be the ensemble cast, because you're kind of looking, and anybody can go. Like you don't see, and you don't see the studio saying, well, this character can't die because that's the draw to the movie. It's like, no, like we're going solely on the script and the story, and we're going to use that to sell this movie. And again, I heard a lot of word of mouth about this one. I heard a lot of people talking about it when it came out, and I was like, okay. And I was like, I will watch it as soon as I can. And I got the opportunity to see it, and I understood the hype. I absolutely understood the hype, and it was it was an awesome horror film. It's I think that year when it came out, it would be hard for me to not put it in my top 10 when it came out. Like it was one of those movies that I walked away from with such an experience. And again, it wasn't a one day thing. I was feeling this for a few days. Like a few days removed from this movie, I was still feeling it. So much so that even I think possibly you're braver than me. If I watch this today, I probably won't watch it at night. You know what I mean? Like I probably would like, no, I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna watch it during the day. I'm gonna watch it during the day because I feel like if I watch it during the night, I'm gonna be turning all the lights off before I go to bed, and I'm just gonna have that very, very uncomfortable feeling before I go to bed. I'm like, I'm gonna try to avoid that.
So on that note, let's start winding down here with some closing thoughts. Um, we talk about movies that sit with you,
Mhm.
and horror in particular. Where you're second guessing yourself, or your mind starts playing tricks on you. Um, I think one of the all-time movies in that conversation would probably be Jaws, because it
Yes.
actually affected people from going to the beach and going in the water. Um, eh, One of the Final Destinations is in the conversation, because now when you're driving on the highway and you see that flatbed with the logs in front of you,
Listen,
you change lanes because
listen.
you think about it.
2 days ago, I
Yeah,
had a friend. I had a friend message me, and they took a photo, and they were behind one of those trucks with the logs in it. And he sent me the photo and goes, nope. And I knew it instantly. So, like you said, there are those movies that to this day are still sticking with people. And that's one of those. Final Destination 2
right,
with that traffic scene. That's one of them.
right. So, would it be fair to say that maybe It Follows is in the same conversation? Maybe
Yeah.
that You know, maybe not long term, but when you watch it for the first time, you're gonna be looking behind you or looking in the
Yes.
rearview mirror like I was, you know,
Yes.
or
It's
checking to see if somebody's following you, you know?
it's
I'd be curious to
it
know.
I would love to again, everyone who I have talked to that has seen it has said they have been very, very scared after. Again, a buddy of mine had no idea I saw it today, and he was like, "Oh, you're in for it. Like you have no idea what you're getting into." And I was like, "I've already seen it. I love it. It's a great movie." And he was like, "Man, I was shaking." And I was like, "I get it because it builds on that fear." And I think that's what works so well with certain horror movies or any movie for that matter is to find something really relatable. Now, I have been in places that I'm either not familiar with. I've been in New York, I've been in Philly, I've been in a bunch of places that I'm not there all the time, where I could be walking and see a certain individual that is a complete stranger to me and could just give me a really weird vibe. It happens. We've all been places walking alone, even with friends we could be walking with, but there could just be a character nearby that just gives us very off very off vibes. So the movie builds on that idea of like the idea that there's just someone in your presence that's making you feel off. And now they're approaching you. So that idea of someone approaching you that you do not know, that is non-responsive, but you know they're never going to stop until they reach you. And the movie goes one step further and goes, oh, well, maybe they look like someone you know, but that fear is still there. So I think, for those reasons that it capitalizes on a real fear that many people have. I know people that are extremely introverted that don't want to be out in those public settings because they're so uncomfortable around people in general, around strangers, about not knowing who's in their area and whatnot. And there have been times I've been in a car, man, where I've just been in a car and someone will walk by the car and I'm on alert. You know what I mean? Like it's and the movie builds off of that feeling. So I think for that reason, it's one of those things that it sticks with people because it's very relatable. And like you said, it may not have the same type of weight or something that lasts with you like a Jaws that still affects people to this day and Final Destination. Who knows? That's a conversation to be had. But I do think that people who have watched this, again, for me, it was at least a few days, like a week, where I was just very uncomfortable. And that's a credit to the nature of the film and how it's executed, how it's shot, the music, everything else, the concept of it all. It sticks the landing. And then the ending is perfect because it's very ambiguous. And it's really up to you as a viewer to interpret whether or not they defeated the entity or not, because you see that. And it builds off of that fear, is that anybody can be a threat. So even if the entity was taken out in that moment as a viewer, as we're watching that scene take place, we're still seeing that stranger as a threat. Even if the entity was defeated, we still see it as a threat because that's the everyday nature of the world that we, unfortunately sometimes sadly live in, is that like anybody could be a threat.
And also, shout out to the director, David Robert Mitchell. Horror does this a lot. It's an original. So,
Yeah.
we're
Yep.
big on originals, so we got to give some love as far as that goes.
Yep.
Alrighty, folks, that was the Panel Bros official breakdown for It Follows. If you could please give us a like, share, and subscribe on YouTube at the Panel Bros, we would appreciate it. As always, those subscribes help us with our reach. In addition to that, if you could please let us know in the comments below how you felt about It Follows, we'd appreciate that as well. For Ricardo Segura, this is Anderson Marchak saying thank you for coming to the panel.